Welcome back. We're on the downward turn. We're on indicator 18. Adjust instruction is needed based on student input, cues, and individual group responses. That just simply means don't just read when you're teaching. If you need your notes, like I need these because I don't want to forget anything, and I always have my notes written out that I'm going to speak to my students when I'm going to speak to my students. But look up and pay attention to your students. Scan the room, left to right, front to back. Make sure that you read their faces, because that's part of, number one, developing relationships, which we all need to do with our students as much as possible. But it also allows you to know that little Tommy who's sitting off to the left over there may look like he's not paying attention, but that's his learning style. And you know it because you know your kids. But you also know that if little Angela's sitting over here to your right and she's just doodling away, you might just need to move over there and make sure that she's really taking notes and that she's not writing out her list of movies that she wants to watch this weekend. So read your kids, read your learners. Just like if we were face to face with you, we would be looking at your faces and we would be noticing if you have a wide-eyed look, ooh, maybe he needs to ask a question, and maybe we could stop and say, did you want to add something, or do you have a question about that? We don't have that opportunity right now because we can't see you, but you can see your students, even if you're virtually teaching. Pay attention to their reactions and their body language, very, very important. Look at the meet standards and exceed standards. You want to elicit student input, and you want to adjust your instruction. If you were in a room with me right now, I wouldn't be going this fast. I'd be watching, and I'd be slowing down a little bit when I see that there might be someone who needs to ask a question. And sometimes people are a little hesitant to ask, and I'll have to draw them out and say, it looks like you want to ask me something. Please go ahead and ask it now, because if you've got that question, chances are other people in the room have a similar or the same question. So invite your students to ask you questions, but sometimes you have to read their faces first. Ask students to respond to you, and if they begin to falter, give them some help, and we call that scaffolding. Sometimes you just have to say, I think what I hear you trying to say is such and such, and if the child nods, then you know you're on the right track. Quite often with students, especially younger students, we say, unpack your thinking. Tell me how you came about that answer, especially if you ask a student a question and he or she is giving you something that sounds like it's off the wall. Don't just frown and use your negative facial expression, telling them in essence, well, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Just say, not quite sure where you're going with this. Explain it to me a little bit more, and give them the confidence to tell you how they arrived at a certain answer. They may be right. I learned that the hard way in my younger teaching days. Number 19. Now this is a tricky one. Uses family and or community resources in instruction to impact student learning and development. The examples that are given are invite special guests in. Okay, so we can't do that now because of COVID-19, but we can do it virtually. Use interesting materials that aren't what we call the norm to make a unit or a lesson more interesting. And then, of course, there are extracurricular activities such as field trips. And again, you're saying, can't do that because it's expensive, can't do that because of COVID-19, but you can do it virtually. I had a friend who was teaching art, and she took her students on a virtual field trip of the Louvre in France, and it was magnificent, and the kids felt like they had actually been there because it was such a good virtual tour for that field trip. So we're into the age of technology. Lots of things are available that were not available in the past. So the other part of this is to keep the family involved. Every opportunity that you have to engage the family as part of a student's learning, please do. If it's as simple as having them do part of their homework with their family, anything that you can do to keep the family involved on a positive basis with your instruction is important. Many times if you need some relatively cheap resources or materials. You can have the children say, or send a note home by your students and say, hey, we're going to do a science activity and my teacher needs XYZ. Things that are easy to buy or things that might already be at home, and that will at least get the parents involved. Okay, moving on to indicator 20. We're in the fourth domain, which is called the learning environment. This is important. Items 20 through 24 should reflect the teacher intern's ability to manage the classroom environment in a way that's conducive to learning. This is where classroom management skills really are important. Most of you just got through taking your classroom management class. I know some of the people who teach that. I know their capabilities. I know what they expected of you. So you should have learned many, many things about how to handle different classroom management issues. So put that knowledge to good use. Indicator 20, adjust the classroom environment to enhance positive peer relationships, motivation, and learning. I know that our classroom management instructors talk about developing relationships. I can't stress how important that is. And believe you me, we've been in enough classrooms that we can walk in and tell if there's a good relationship between the teacher and the students. And it's always very encouraging to see that the teacher's taken the time at the beginning of the year to establish good relationships. And it's always sad when you see that they haven't taken the time. This is where you can have contracts with individual students. You can have students keep private records of how well they did last week as opposed to what they're doing this week so that they can see their own progress. Indicator 21, attend to and delegate routine tasks. The more you have your students involved in your classroom routines and procedures, the better off you are. The more ownership they will have to help you keep the room straight, turning the papers to the right place, etc. They should know your agenda for every class. They shouldn't be caught off guard unless there's an emergency situation, and give them responsibilities, and I think you'll do well on that particular indicator. Indicator 22, use multiple strategies to foster appropriate student behavior according to individual and situational needs. And we do live in a situational society. Many of our students bring lots of baggage to school every day. Sometimes we as teachers aren't even aware of the seriousness of what our students have to deal with. So treat each child sensitively, and remember sometimes you just have to expect different things of different children because they live different lives. Use multiple strategies to foster appropriate behavior. And this particular indicator I feel like is tied back to indicators 7, 11, 21, and 20. It's all part of that circle of expectation. 23, the 23rd indicator creates a culturally inclusive environment that promotes fairness, safety, respect, and support for all learners. So here you go again with the diversity that we've mentioned 2 times before, extremely important in today's society. If you have other cultures represented in your classroom, find ways to include those cultures in your learning activities. I was in a classroom a couple of years ago, and there was a brand new student who was from Mexico, and she spoke very little English, and one of the first things that the teacher had her do was to teach the students in her class how to count in Spanish and some basic vocabulary words. And the next time I came to see that particular class, it happened to be the same one, that little girl's self-confidence had gone up many, many, many feet, so to speak, because she felt like she was really a part of that class, and her teacher had welcomed her in a very positive way. Indicator 24, maximize instructional time. The old term is time on task. My term is be organized. Plan, implement. Work hard on your plan, anticipate problems that may occur so you'll be ready for them, and then implement your plan. Keep your students on task. Do not waste time. Make sure that your transitional routines are set well so that the children in your classroom know how to move from one activity to the other or from one class to the other. And then domain 5 is professional responsibilities. And I have found that many people don't rate very high on this, and there's no reason not to, because all this is you reporting to us. You document evidence that you're involved in professional learning communities. That's what PLC stands for, and many schools do those now. That you're involved in data meetings. We're a data-driven society, and especially in the education field. So many schools have data meetings. They study the data results and they change instruction based on those results. Tell us if you put out newsletters. Tell us about the positive notes that you send home. Tell us about your involvement in any extracurricular activities, and be sure you tell us about your professional development opportunities that you're taking advantage of. Many of you are in school districts where there are new teacher induction programs, and so you might be involved in that. We want to know about that. We want to know how you collaborate with your colleagues, and we particularly want to know how you communicate with families about the children that are in your classroom. So all that is just simply reporting. You might want to stop here for just a second because I'm going to do a little wrap up and